Thanks for joining me in making this pendant. Go ahead and gather up your supplies, which you can get a whole list of in the description below, and then we will go ahead and get started. We're going to start our pendant by picking up a stop bead, and you don't need to leave much room at the end of or much thread past the tail, past your stop bead, because we're just going to use this to tie off at the end. We're not going to add a needle to it at any point. So I have my stop bead on here, and I'm going to use one of the 11-0s in my project so that I can then just incorporate this 11-0 into the project itself, and I don't have an extra bead. Then I'm going to pick up an IrisDuo, and I already have these guys lined out in the order that I'm going to pick them up. And typically I don't do this with beads, but for IrisDuos, you have a curved side and a flat side. So what I've done is I've just situated them here so that I have all of the right sides or the curved sides facing up, and this will just make it easier for me to pick them up as I go. I'm going to pick up an IrisDuo and an 11-0, and then just continue this pattern, picking up an 11-0 in between my IrisDuos until I get to the last IrisDuo. So now on your thread, you should have something that looks like this. We've got our stop bead and our pattern of IrisDuo, seed bead, IrisDuo, seed bead, and an IrisDuo at the very end. We're going to take our seed beads and our IrisDuos, take our needle and thread and go through that stop bead, which is the first bead of our project, and a couple more seed beads and IrisDuos here, and keep going around, continue passing through all of the beads in the project. And this will help you get a good grip on your thread so that you can pull it nice and tight to make sure you don't have any extra space, any gaps in between your beads. And you're going to continue around until you reach your stop bead. At your stop bead, you can just take that thread that's looped around the stop bead, and if you give it a little pull, you should be able to just undo that. You don't have to, you can leave it wrapped around. It's not going to be very noticeable in your project, so I wouldn't worry about it too much, but you can undo that. And now what we're going to do is take our two threads together and tie a little knot. I'm going to do 2 knots here just to make sure that it's secure, and nice tight little pull, and then that should cinch this up, make it tight, so that if you did have any gaps in between your beads, any extra thread showing, you shouldn't have that anymore. Taking my needle through the bottom hole of the IrisDuo, and then I'm going to do a little U-turn here and go back through the IrisDuo, same one, but through the top or open hole. And I'm going to pick up 3 11-0 seed beads as I do this. And through that top or open hole. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this side and pick up 3 11-0s, and now I'm going back down through the bottom hole of the IrisDuo. So what this does is it creates a little border around the IrisDuo here with those 3 seed beads. As we continue on to this next step, we're going to be working with only these sets of 3 seed beads. So we have the 5 original seed beads that we used when we picked up our IrisDuos, but we're not going to go through those again. They are very close to where we're working, but don't get tempted to go through them. So coming out of the bottom hole of my IrisDuo, I'm going to pass up through my first 11 in that group of 3, remembering not to touch any of those 11 that was part of our original little circle. And I'm going to pick up 2 more 11 and then I'm going to pass through the top hole of the next IrisDuo. I'm going to pick up 3 of my 11 through the bottom hole of that IrisDuo. So that will create a little border on this side here. I'm going to go back up through that 11 that we are sharing. So that is, we'll call that our sharing 11 because we are going to share that 11 and that 11 is going to be the 3rd bead for each group of 3 that's going to border the IrisDuos. Through 2 of our 11 at the top, the 2 that we are not sharing, through the IrisDuo, and my 3 seed beads on this side. And now I'm going to go through the bottom hole, or the inside, the hole closest to the inside of my project. Go through that hole of the IrisDuo. And I'm going to pick up another 3 11 So at this point you can start to see a pattern. 2 11 through that bead that we're sharing, that 3rd bead, that is sitting atop of one of our original seed beads that we picked up. We're going to go past or through that IrisDuo, up through that 11 that we're sharing, pick up another 2 11 through the top of that 11 and now we need 3 seed beads to complete or to add on to the side of this IrisDuo. Up through that 11 that we're sharing, through the 2 seed beads that we're not, through the top of the IrisDuo, down through all 3 seed beads on the side of our IrisDuo. And now here we are at the very last IrisDuo. So we're going to go past, or we're going to go through the bottom hole of that IrisDuo. And now, because this is our last IrisDuo, we already have a bead here to share, so we're going to pick up that bottom 11, the one that we're sharing, and pick up 2 more 11 through the top hole of the IrisDuo, 2 more 11 and then down through the bead that we're sharing on this side here. So what we've done is we've filled in all of the spaces, all of these little wedge spaces between the IrisDuos. I'm going to pass through my IrisDuo, and I'm going to go up through 3 seed beads along the side of my IrisDuo. Now at this point I don't feel like I need to really reinforce anything. As long as you've pulled your project tight enough as you've gone along and you don't have any slack thread in there, you should be good to move on to the next step. We're now going to cap the top of each IrisDuo with some crystals. The crystals I'm using here are drops. So the drops are like a raindrop shape. So you would have a top which would be the skinnier, elongated side of your drop, and then you have the bottom, which would be the more rounded, shorter side. So just like a raindrop. I'm going to pick up my first crystal so that it sits sort of upside down on my needle. I'm starting by going through the top side, going through to the bottom, and then I'm picking up an 11-0, and then I'm picking up my next crystal so that it sits in the opposite direction. This will put the bottom of my teardrops on either side of my 11-0. I'm going to then go down the other side of my IrisDuo through 2 11-0s, and I'm going to just gently push those crystals into position, and then I'm going to pass through the next 2 11-0s that are bordering the next IrisDuo. And again, I'm going to do the same thing and just pick up my crystals so that the bottom of the crystal, or the bottom of the teardrop, is on either side of an 11-0. Down to seed beads on the side of the IrisDuo. Make sure that my crystals fall into position here. And then through the next 2 seed beads that are bordering the top of the next IrisDuo. So as I do this and I add my crystals, I'm not going to go through that 11-0 that I was sharing on the last step. I'm just going through the 4 seed beads at the very top here, at the very top of my IrisDuos. So I'm going to go ahead and continue around here and cap off the next 3 IrisDuos, and then we will move on to the next step. After adding the crystals to the top of each one of your IrisDuos, creating that little cap there, we're going to tie off the thread that we're using, and I'm going to start with a new piece of thread for this next step. You can continue with the thread that you're using if you think it's long enough, but I just prefer to start with a fresh piece of thread at this point. I've tied off my thread, and so now I have one flat little star. Each one of these stars here is going to be the front and the back of the pendant. So once you've created one star, you're going to create a second star exactly the same way as you'd created the first one. Once you have both of those stars done, we're going to start connecting them together at the points, and this will help create a pocket that we are going to put our Rivoli in. So to do the connections, we're going to pick up one of our stars, and I'm going to, because I'm using a new piece of thread, I'm going to use my 11-0 here in between the crystals as my stop bead. I'm going to take my needle and thread through that bead just once, and this should just prevent my thread from getting pulled out as I work with the project. I want to layer these two, the top and bottom, together so that the flat sides of the IrisDuos on each piece are facing. And so when I put them together, the curved, or the right side of the IrisDuo is facing outward, and that is what we will see when our project is done. So we have here at the top, or at this one point, so I am connecting all of these points together. At the top here, at the point, I have made that 1 11-0 my stop bead, and I'm going to pick up one more 11-0 and then pass through the 11-0 that belongs to the other side of my pendant, my second star. Pick up another 11-0 and back through that bead that we made our stop bead. And what this is going to do is create a little connection there of 4 beads. So 2 beads are from the top and the bottom of the pendant, and the 2 we've added to the side. And I'm going to go ahead and reinforce this connection. You don't want this connection to be loose. You don't want it to have any give to it, no more than you normally would. So what I'm going to do is go through here a couple more times and just reinforce this. This is where our pendant is going to be held together on each point here, of course. So we want to make sure that any wear and tear that it gets, because it is holding our pendant together, is going to not cause it to get looser or break. So I'm going to go through those 4 beads again. And then once I feel like that's pretty secure and tight, I'm going to pass through my drop, 2 11-ohs, and then up 2 11-ohs and my next drop. And connect the next 2 points in my star here. Go through my 11-oh, pick up a new 11-oh, through the 11-oh that belongs to the point on the other star, and then another new 11-oh, and back through that first 11-oh. And then again, just go through this connection, go through these seed beads and make this connection nice and tight and secure. You don't have to go too crazy with it, but you just want to make sure that it is going to withstand the wear and tear of being a connection point on your pendant. So I'm going to do this for the next 2 points of my star, but I'm going to stop before I do the 5th connection because I need that connection to be open to put my Rivoli in. So I'm going to go and do 2 more of these connections, and then we will drop our Rivoli into the pendant. I've now done 4 of my 5 connections, and I've left that 1 connection open so that I have a little pocket here to drop my Rivoli into. I have an 18mm Rivoli here, and so it's going to fit perfectly in there and take up all of that space. You could try using a smaller size Rivoli, but I wouldn't go too small because it's going to just sort of rattle around in your pendant in that space there created between your front and back star. So I've dropped that in there. I've dropped my Rivoli in that pocket, and I'm going to go ahead and just finish up this last little connection here. So I'm going to finish up this last connection, and then I'm going to work on these connections or these open sides here to give it a little bit of a finished look. So go ahead and finish this last connection, and then we will move on to the sides where your Rivoli is peeking out. With the 4th connection of my Charity Pendant done, or I should say the 5th connection, my final connection, what I'm going to do now is work on the sides here where you can see that Rivoli peeking through. This step is somewhat optional. I would say if you feel like you don't need to do this, you don't have to, but it does help to give it a little bit more of a finished look. So I'm going to take my thread and needle coming out of one of my seed beads here, and I'm going to go down through my crystal, and just my crystal. I'm going to pick up 3 of my 11-ohs, and then I'm going to go up through the crystal on the opposite side and on the opposite star. So I'm crisscrossing and going over, crisscrossing over that empty gap there where you can see the Rivoli. I'm going to pass through my 11-0 here and then down the drop crystal on this other side. I'm going to pick up one 11-0 seed bead, and then I'm going to pass through the center seed bead of that group of 3 that we used when we crisscrossed over. Pick up another 11-0 and go up through this other drop here that we haven't gone through yet. So this will be the last of the 4 drops that we need to go through. And once I go through there, push my beads in place. I've created a nice tight little closure there, and I've closed up that empty gap. So I'm going to move on here and go over to the next gap. Going to pick up, or I'm going to go through my crystal, my first drop, pick up 3 11-0s, and then I'm going to take these 11-0s and sort of crisscross them over this opening, go up my drop on the opposite side, so it's sitting sort of catty corner, through my 11-0, down the drop, pick up an 11-0, and then go through that center 11-0 in that group of 3 that we picked up, our group of 3 that is stretching over and covering that empty space. One more 11-0, and then up the crystal, the last crystal here that we haven't gone through yet. Push everything into place. I'm going to go through my 11-0, through my crystal, and I'm just going to move over to the next section here. So I'm just going to pass through all of my beads, all of the beads that I added, follow my thread pattern or my thread path, and go through all these beads again, up through this crystal, through my seed bead, and I'm going to start over again here. So down through my crystal, I'm going to pick up the 3 11-0s, cross them over, up the other side. I'm going to follow the same pattern and add this little cross or this little X of seed beads to each one of these gaps. Now that I have all of the gaps seamed up with a little X of seed beads, it's now time to decide how I want to hang this. So I can, if I want to make 2, I can make a pair of earrings with it, or I could do a pendant. And I love the idea of using this as a pendant because then you can make a couple of them and you can give one to a friend and you can keep one and just have it be a little reminder of your friendship. So I think that's a lovely idea. To add the bail, I'm just going to add a very simple bail to this. You can buy a bail, you could buy a metal bail and attach a bail in all different kinds of ways, but I'm just going to show you how to do a very simple bail so that you don't need any additional materials. I have very little bit of thread left here, so hopefully that will get me through the end of my project. Coming out of one of my crystals, I'm going to pass through one of my 11-0s. So I'm passing through one of the 11-0s at the connection where I connected all of my, I connected that point. So if you want to connect in a different location, that's fine if you've gone through quite a bit and you don't think you have enough space to get your needle and thread through those beads again, you could always connect someplace else or at a different kind of bail. But I have plenty of thread, or I have plenty of room in those beads. I'm using a thinner thread. I'm using the dragon thread, and so that is, even going through these beads a few times, it still leaves plenty of room in those beads that I can still go through and add this bail. So to do that, I'm going to pick up just a series of 11-Os, and I'm going to pick up 7 because I think that's going to work for me. You just want to pick up the number of beads that you're going to need to make a loop large enough to accommodate whatever chain or leather you're going to hang your pendant on. So I'm going to do 7 because I think that's going to work for me. I would make it a little bit longer or make your bail a bit larger if you're going to give it to somebody and you don't know what they might be hanging their pendant off of. And that way you just make sure that you've made it big enough that it should accommodate almost anything that they have. I'm going to then go through the seed bead, the 11-O opposite. So I'm going through those seed beads that were between the crystals, and I'm going to go up through my seed beads again, so those seed beads that I added to create the bail, so all 7. For me, it's going to be all 7 of those seed beads. And I'm going to pass through the 11-O again where I started. I'm going to go from the opposite side. I'm going to approach that 11-O from the opposite side so that this will sort of straighten out the bail and stop the bail from going or leaning in one direction. Up through those seed beads again. And as we've mentioned before, anytime that you're adding something on like a bail or you're doing a connection, any place that's going to get some wear and tear, where your piece is going to be hanging or there's going to be a lot of movement, just reinforce that a number of times. And I'm going to go through the 11-O again and just back through my bail. So all I'm doing here is reinforcing this bail. And once I have this done, my piece will be finished. Last thing to do is just to find my stop thread, which I have conveniently placed my bail right where my stop thread is. So that is going to be easy for me. All I need to do is just join these 2 pieces of thread together and tie this off and burn down my thread. And once I have that done, I will have a lovely pendant to share with a friend. So I would recommend making 2. You could do same color, different colors, and yeah, just use it as a nice little friendship pendant. I hope you had fun with this tutorial. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel so that you can be notified as soon as we have other amazing fun tutorials for you to try. Remember to also share photos of your designs and creations with us in our Facebook group. Look forward to seeing you on the Facebook group.